I don't think that a dramatic overhaul to Starfield's gameplay will save the game, because I don't personally think that the game itself needs saving. Some people will always hate Starfield for what it is at its core, even after countless updates, and that's fine. Obviously, no game will ever be for everyone, but there are plenty of players out there who do love the Starfield experience as it was at launch and as it exists today. And I'd wager there are some players who even prefer the launch version of the game. Because as great as the updates we've already seen might be, they don't necessarily fit with the original vision for Starfield, as I'll try to explain later. With rumours of even more dramatic updates on the horizon though, supposedly bringing big changes to the central gameplay loop, many fans and critics are expecting or hoping for a revival on the scale of Cyberpunk 2077's or No Man's Skies. But I also think they're fundamentally misunderstanding why those games made a comeback. Because as well as launching in very different states of polish, I think the change in public opinion has just as much, if not more, to do with image.
Must say I'm surprised you are still here. If I were in your shoes, I would have turned heel and ran as far away from this place as I could.
There are several well-known games that have previously painstakingly restored their reputation through a series of big updates and good PR. But to be frank, I think most of the key examples differ from Starfield in one major way. When No Man's Sky first released in 2016, it was not the game it had purported to be. It was missing countless features and it was incredibly buggy. I remember playing in release week and ejecting the disc after only a few hours. Partly because there was very little to do in the game and partly because it barely worked for me. When Cyberpunk 2077 came out in 2020, it was not the game people were expecting either. It also lacked many features and systems and was disastrously buggy, while running at about 2 frames per second at best as well. On the other hand, when Starfield landed in 2023, it was actually in a surprisingly good state. By Bethesda standards, it was incredibly polished and bug-free. And honestly, I think the game also delivered on basically everything that had been promised. It didn't go down that well with a large portion of the audience, and it wasn't exactly what many were hoping for, but on paper it was the same game Bethesda had sold us in trailers and deep dives, and it reviewed pretty well too. And if a game seemingly achieves everything it set out to do but still doesn't capture the attention of a player, then it's likely that game just isn't for them. I didn't particularly enjoy Cyberpunk 2077 at release because it was a huge mess, but I was pretty sure that with a bit more polish it would be right up my street. And sure enough, it eventually was. That said, I'd wager that most people who played Starfield back in 2023 and didn't enjoy the game were probably not primarily put off by bugs or performance issues. I've been through the many problems people have with Starfield several times before, so I won't again. But suffice it to say that a lot of these issues are fundamental to the game's design. The story is the story, the loading screens will never fully disappear, and the cities and settlements and quests are unlikely to ever change much. Some of the complaints I've heard about the game are basically asking that Bethesda start from scratch and make Fallout or Skyrim in space. And while that obviously isn't even remotely feasible, it's also sadly neglectful of the advantages of the game's unique structure. People often talk about how Cyberpunk's many updates and eventual overhaul completely transformed the game. But as someone who played Cyberpunk on day one and has dipped back in at least once a year since release, I have to say that I don't think the game ever felt fully transformed to me. It just got significantly smoother. All of the barriers to the fun that was already there was slowly removed, as the developers had the opportunity to retune systems and polish gameplay and add little details. But fundamentally, I feel the game is the same. CD Projekt Red were basically just able to finish the game they'd always intended to release, and more people were able to enjoy it where they couldn't before because it was so buggy. It's like they hung up a great piece of art but didn't get a chance to clean the glass on the frame, so nobody was actually able to fully enjoy it. But I don't think Starfield can really get that much more polished, or at least it can't in a way that's noticeable to the general public. We can hope instead then that any kind of overhaul focuses on the clunky elements of the game, like the inventory management system, the NPC AIs, and space travel. But we can't expect the glass in the frame to get much cleaner. The artwork that is Starfield largely is what it is. It honestly makes me wonder if Starfield would have benefited from being a whole lot buggier at launch, because at least then it could have made a more obvious recovery over time, and would have had something to blame the bad reception on. It would be fair to say that No Man's Sky was overhauled in a much more dramatic way than Cyberpunk was. But even then, I don't think, in my eyes, it was actually transformed. It is significantly more fun and fleshed out than it once was, but the DNA remains the same. And I know this because, having started a new game just last year, I still bounced off of No Man's Sky pretty quickly, because I'm just not sure it's the game for me. I respect what they've done with it, and I really wanted to love the experience, but it's just not the kind of game I particularly want to play. Just like Starfield may or may not be the kind of game you really love, regardless of your affinity for other space games or RPGs. I think we can all agree that any update that removes a barrier to fun in Starfield is a good thing. But as much as certain players may demand it, I hope that Bethesda don't end up making changes that undermine the greatest features of Starfield. Because the truth is that we as players don't really know what's good for the game. We just have indistinct instincts for what doesn't feel quite right. And the Shattered Space DLC proves this well. Before Shattered Space released, a whole lot of people were very insistent that Starfield would benefit immensely from bigger on-planet maps that are more densely populated with details and quests. And that seems like a reasonable thing to suggest, given that we know those kinds of maps have worked amazingly well in previous Bethesda games, and the barren landscapes of Starfield aren't generally well loved. In practice though, Varun Kai and its square section of handcrafted map feels really odd compared with the other settlements in the game, and the length of time you can easily spend there without jumping back in your ship kind of ruins the whole feel of the experience. It sounded like a thing that would be nice, but it simply didn't play to Starfield's actual strengths. So sure enough, even though Shattered Space seemed to give a lot of people exactly what they wanted, it was widely disliked, probably even more than the base game was. Now, in fairness, the lack of space stuff would not have been such a problem if the quality of the content and story available on planet had been higher. But I think either way, Shattered Space feels too distinct from the stuff that makes Starfield uniquely great. The introduction of land vehicles is another change that proves we don't really know what's best for Starfield. After boost packing across a planet for 10 minutes or so, everybody wanted a little rover to traverse the terrain more efficiently. After they were put in the game though, despite being very fun to use, they also opened Starfield up to a whole new round of criticism, because the terrain of planets wasn't really built with vehicles in mind, and because they didn't fundamentally change the experience of exploring random on-planet locations. Again, these rovers could have been built to handle rough terrain slightly better in the first place, but that wouldn't ultimately affect the incompatibility between these buggies and the game's open world gameplay. I do think that vehicles in the end are a net positive, but they do demonstrate how the ideas of players and critics that sound like a panacea on paper aren't generally a natural fit for the game as it was originally envisioned. I'm not saying that every suggestion a player or critic offers for Starfield is going to be inherently terrible, because certainly I've made several such suggestions before, and I'd like to believe that at least 2% of them are valid. But I do think that making suggestions which entirely neglect the heart of what the game is kind of misses the point. I love Fallout and the Elder Scrolls plenty, but I don't want Starfield to be slowly transformed into another Fallout or Elder Scrolls game, because then I might as well just be playing one of those games instead. I think it's really awesome that Bethesda were able to take some big swings with Starfield, like having more immersive space travel and offering such a vast number of planets. And I hope they work on finessing those features to make them more enjoyable and approachable, rather than minimizing them in order to appease people who want the game to play and look exactly like a different game they've played and loved. Bethesda game studios do seem to be listening to player feedback, which is great, but equally I hope they know how to filter through the noise and not make changes that aren't actually for the best. Obviously, both Cyberpunk and No Man's Sky also owe much of their ultimate success to their consistently sincere, realistic, and apologetic communications with the public after release. Both Hello Games and CD Projekt Red knew they had done wrong by fans, and whether their motivations were noble or not, they volunteered to grovel and spend a lot of resources and time to restore their reputations. Bethesda themselves behaved in much the same way with Fallout 76 and slowly rebuilt trust in that game too. So I'm hopeful they're equally smart with Starfield's marketing and PR in the future. Starfield definitely isn't for everyone, but removing as many barriers to the fun as possible will allow more people to realize that it might be for them. If Bethesda managed to rework the space travel experience, reducing the number of loading screens and offering more seamless transitions between star systems, planets, and surfaces, then Starfield will feel noticeably smoother to play, while still being the same game at its core. And if they can make planet exploration feel more rewarding, then players will have more to do without losing the heart of the experience. Reducing the friction between gameplay elements will allow Starfield's best aspects to shine through more clearly. But if you don't like those gameplay elements in the first place, I'm not convinced that any amount of updates are going to change that. But regardless, I really do want more people to play Starfield and realize how great it is in so many unique ways. If the rumors are true, then I look forward to the time when PlayStation players will get a chance to check out the settled systems too. And I pray that Bethesda will continue to polish the gameplay while giving us exciting new expansions for years to come. I don't really know how much Bethesda can do to improve the Starfield experience, but if you already love the game like I do, then it's likely that any changes we see will only deepen that love. If you're someone who really gave the game a fair shake and still bounced off the core experience, though, I wouldn't necessarily expect that to ever change. Then again, even if the game itself never really changes, sometimes the player does. And that might be enough to make a new Starfield fan somewhere down the line. But what do you think about Starfield's rumoured overhaul and the game's current image problem? Let me know down in the comments, and please do like and subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk more games. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.